Hello again, this is Doug, the 2-Minute Gardener, and we are getting close to pruning our roses. But today we're going to talk about how to sharpen your loppers and pruners, because a really sharp lopper is important for being able to prune your roses properly. So once a year I like to take my pruner, both my little bypass pruner and my big lopper, and get a nice metal file and sharpen the blade. And to sharpen the blade, you take this metal file and you kind of just run it like you would be sharpening a knife, back and forth, because you want to get that new metal exposed. This good metal file will take off the dull edge and also take off some of the gunk from last year's, all the junk you've been sharpening and cutting with these loppers. And so you want to just kind of keep running it away from you and away from the lopper. And this gets a nice sharp edge on your pruners. And then you want to do the same for your big loppers, because ultimately when it comes to pruning big roses, you need some big loppers. So again, using the same technique, just kind of prune it until you start to see that new shiny metal. And with that new shiny metal, you're getting a really nice sharp edge. I like to do this outside because you are generating some metal filings, and so you don't want necessarily going down in the garage. It's good to have that out in the garden away from everybody. So, I don't know if you can see this really carefully. You see I'm starting to get a nice shiny metal edge to the loppers. And this will ensure that I have a really good cut when it's time to prune those roses in January. So you kind of wipe that off a little bit. Now if you can see that it's starting to develop a nice metal sharpness to it. Anyway, you do this for about 4 or 5 minutes. Get a nice sharp edge to all of that. And then when you're done, I like to give it a little squirt of WD-40 just to kind of oil it up, because as you can tell, mine's been around for a while. And so this takes care of some of the rust issues. And again, if your dog is around, make sure the dog stays away when you're doing this. And this gets the tool nice and ready for a big rose pruning season. Same thing with my little lopper. Give it just a little squirt of that WD-40. Helps clean the gunk off. Gets all the mechanisms working ready. And that's it. That's how you get your loppers and pruners ready for pruning season. Hello again, this is Doug, the 2-Minute Gardener, and today we're going to talk about pruning roses. It's January, you've cut off the water, you've stopped feeding the roses, so hopefully they've kind of gone into a dormant state like this rose bush here. This guy pretty much is done with its blooming. It doesn't have a lot of good growth. It is ready to be pruned. Now, in order to prune roses, you need a couple things. You want to have some nice heavy gloves, because roses are sharp. You want to have a nice big bypass lopper if you're pruning a big hybrid tea rose like this guy. This is a perfect moment. And you also want to have your little bitty hand pruners for doing the fine detail work. But most rose pruning, you just need this. So let's get started, and hopefully my dog Ginger won't rip the gloves off my hand, because she loves to chew on these garden gloves. So, to get started on a rose that's kind of nice and developed and big like this, you first just gotta whack all the top growth off. So you just start whacking just to get everything down. You wanna just whack everything that's about above a knee in height. So just start trimming away, get it down to the ground. Don't worry about doing the final cuts, we'll do all that later. But you're kind of getting rid of all this little growth that impedes your ability to see the canes. The canes are the big mechanisms of growth for these roses. They're the really big stems, and you want to trim everything above that so that you can clearly see what is left to be cut once you clear off the top growth. So clear that top growth off, and you can again do most of that with your big bypass loppers. Just keep whacking away, whacka whacka. Occasionally, you gotta whack a rose next to it just to be able to see what you've done. All right, so we're almost done whacking all the top growth off of this rose. so we can really get a good sense of the cane spacing in the rose bush. Almost done. Whacking away, whacking, whacking, whacking. Just keep on whacking till you get all that little growth off of there. Okay. Now, it's important when you're doing this to have really nice sharp loppers, which is why I did that video earlier this week about pruning or sharpening your pruning loppers. So make sure you got some nice sharp loppers before you prune your roses. Okay. So, we've whacked all the top growth off. As you can see, we got about a dozen canes here, and they're bunched tightly together. Now, one of the ways to have a healthy rose bush in the spring and the summer is to get rid of some of that growth in the interior of the rose bush itself. So it's important to whack the roses down, give them a good hard pruning in December and January, because this will kind of slow the roses down so they have a really fabulous bloom in March and April and May. Roses need a couple months off to really have long, healthy lives. So we want to prune them down hard in December and January. So, as you saw in the first video, we've already pruned the top off the rose. Now we're going to start looking at the cane layout. So this is an old rose. It's about 15 years old. And as you can see, it's got about a dozen canes in it. So it's important that when you're looking at roses that have more than 5 canes, you want to create a vase. So you don't want canes in the middle of your rose bush. You want a kind of nice peripheral cane layout, kind of like a spiral. So when I look at this rose bush, I want to get rid of old canes, crossing canes, and canes in the middle. So this one, for example, is one of the older ones, probably doesn't produce a lot of great roses. So I take my big loppers and I go all the way down here and I cut it. And keep going until I get that guy off of there. All right, so that guy gets whacked out of here. And then this one also is in the middle, crossing. Don't like that. This one's in the middle. Although it's a newer one, I don't want rose canes in the middle of the bush because that creates disease centers. So again, whack out old, broken, crossing, and dead. It's kind of the standards. And occasionally you can cut off little guys like this. Now this one is not an older crossing one, but he's half dead, so it's not a very productive cane. So I don't really like that guy. So I'm gonna get that guy out of here. Again, using the lopper to whack him out, cut off some of that peripheral growth. All right, we're starting to get a nice clearing. So now, what do we have left? Well, this guy's kind of small, tiny, and mostly brown, so he's not really gonna do anything. So let's get rid of that guy. This guy, again, mostly dead growth. A little bit of green growth, but not a lot. He's been supplanted by this guy. So let's get rid of that last one I just whacked out. And again, we want to kind of do a little trimming work. It's also important, if you can do it, trim it at a spot where there's an outward facing bud eye. Now, bud eyes become these stems on the outsides of the canes. And again, you want the growth of the rose bush to go out, not in. If it grows out, then airflow can get into the bush. You'll have less disease in the springtime and in the summertime. So again, you see how we've pruned this out. We've really made a nice radial spacing of all the roses, all the rose canes. And it's a little bit more conducive to a healthy rose pruning. So. Well, this is Doug the 2-Minute Gardener back in the rose garden. As you can see, Ginger has gotten a hold of one of my gloves, so I had to stop, go get some more gloves so I can finish this last part. So, in the first 2 videos, we showed you how to take the top off a rose for pruning. The second video, we talked about getting all the canes nicely spaced out and removing crossing and broken canes and canes in the middle. The third part, and equally as important for pruning your rose garden, is to clean up the soil. So if you look down at this rose bush, we've done all the pruning. We have debris everywhere, we have mulch everywhere. It's kind of a big mess. So I always like to, when I'm done with pruning my roses, take everything away, all the old leaves and mulch. The reason that is important is that a lot of insects and diseases like rust and powdery mildew have overwintering spores that live in these petals and in the leaves of these rose bushes. So it's important when you clean up the rose garden, get every last one of those leaves and petals out of there, and also most of the mulch. So you bring in a nice layer of fresh mulch when you're done with all your roses. So when you prune your rose garden, make sure you get all the loose leaves and stuff up. And then you have it ready for your feeding and your mulching in February. So I'm going to keep cleaning this up. But again, you just want to get all the debris out of there so that you don't have those overwintering spores and insects in your rose garden. So that's another important tip for having a really healthy rose garden in the spring, is doing that little bit of extra work in January and December. Well, that's all for now. Again, this is Doug, the 2-Minute Gardener. Remember to hit like and subscribe to see more of my garden videos. Thanks for watching.